Hi, my name's Ross Brewer. I'm with the Cyber Intel community, and today I'm joined by James Carter. As you know, most of you have seen the sort of intro to this. My background in security goes back about 25 years, and more recently joined Attack IQ. But having worked with James in my former position, it's interesting the intro that I do to the actual channel. I talk about an ex-colleague who had done a lot of forensic investigations, of which very few were ever made public. And I put James on the spot today, actually explaining that to him and reminding him of a conversation I had with him. So he might allude to that in our discussion today. But what I'd like to do is have introduce James Carter and have James give a little bit of his background and what he's done over his career. Thanks, James.
Thanks, Ross. Pleasure to be on the show. James Carter, Chief Security Officer for LogRhythm. Been at LogRhythm now for 5 years. Just hit my 5-year anniversary. I also run a part of our R&D group, which is an interesting thing, being a product company, having the person who runs security and the security operation help drive the R&D roadmap as well. And so very unique and very cool opportunity as a chief security officer. So I've been doing that for 5 years. Hold multiple titles: data protection officer, chief privacy officer, you name it. Anything that falls into that, physical security, anything with the security and risk aspect of it falls under my purview. I spent my entire career in information security, so I'm going on 24 years now. Started out in the government in the mid-90s when security first started becoming a thing. Did that for about 4 years in the Air Force, and then left, and then became a government contractor. Did some exploit development, more offensive focused things, some security consulting with that contractor as well. And then left and went security consulting full time, was a part of IBM, was a part of X-Force back when they acquired ISS. So I did a lot of ethical hacks, pen testing, security consulting work, architecture, exploit development still, you name it. And then I sort of traded my proactive hat in security for a more responsive hat, and went and was employee 53 at a company called Mandiant. And that's where Ross, I think, gets the history there. While I was at Mandiant, I did 160 plus intrusion investigations. Just a handful were made public. Most of it was nation state threat actors. And then some financial crime groups and hacktivism type stuff. So those I don't know if I can talk about, so I'll hold off on those. But did that, and then when FireEye acquired Mandiant, I decided, you know what, I'm going to, it's my time. I want to leave New York City anyways, and I just met my fiance, my now wife. And so we moved, and I became deputy CISO, and then did that for a couple of years. And I thought I was going to be the on the forefront, pushing the envelope, be the captain of the ship to transform cybersecurity and healthcare. And then I realized I'm the only one on that ship, and that security and healthcare is extremely challenging. You see every single threat actor you can imagine, it's just hard to do, because I mean, if you're not tying your program as a CISO, and this is like one of my number one tips, is like tie it to whatever your core business function is. In this case, it was patient care. So everything we did in security is a part of patient care. And then I left the clinic and joined LogRhythm. So that was a long-winded introduction. Thanks, Ross.
Well, James, I can't tell you how excited I am to have you on the channel. You're sort of you weren't the first, because I wanted to sort of build up to having you on, and actually having worked with you for a few years and had you at my back and your team, people like Andrew Costas and other analysts. When we were doing sort of live sort of BBC interviews, I was on the phone to you, I was on the phone to your team across the world, getting all the intel and what was happening on the sort of ongoing threat before we went live in the studio. And I think your background's fascinating. I think it's very relevant. And one of the biggest challenges we have in our community and on this channel is how far we can go with our discussions. So I just appreciate you being as open and candid as you can, and protecting what you got to protect and not raising your head too far above the parapet. So it's an absolute pleasure to have you. So James, what I'd like to do is sort of touch on the sort of 3 areas that we focus on within the cyber intel community channel, which is intelligence, best practice, and experience sharing. So if we start with intelligence, throughout your career, what have you sort of learned that would be interesting from an intelligence standpoint, sharing into the community?
Well, I think that's it's interesting, Russ. I mean, you could look at it from the perspective of threat intel and sharing from that aspects of things, or just kind of career intel and how to build a program successfully. But from a from a threat intel perspective, I think the really cool part is that there are a lot of really close threat intel communities that really work together and try to help each other and sharing that intelligence with each other to build up their infrastructure of intel. And you can get it clean, and it's made up of the world's foremost experts in the area. And I think even as a CISO, getting attached to those communities is absolutely critical. I mean, we do it now where I pull in, there's two different groups, the COVID, I think, Coalition Task Force or something like that, and then the other CTI for COVID, and they both have intelligence feed, and they're made up of all the who's who in intel, and they were brought together because of the whole pandemic situation. And so, being part of that community gives me access to that intel, and so we have those direct feeds coming into our operation. Me being part of certain industry sectors and their intel and things like that, you get a lot of really good insight, more than what you would get from general open source intel or something that you're gonna have to pay for. And so I think just making sure that you're part of those communities is actually a really good thing, because some of them have you have to know someone to get in kind of thing, where people have to vouch for you. And so the hardest part is identifying those folks that are also members of the community that can vouch on your behalf and speak for you. Because oftentimes if you screw up, then whoever vouched for you is also kicked out of the community as well. So you have to be very careful with that. But and because security is such a close-knit still career, that probably half the people that are in there, and it doesn't look good for you if you've ever been kicked out of one of those communities, and what that could look like for your career down the road. Because, like I said, it's close knit, and everybody knows everything about everybody. So it's kind of our job as security practitioners to be that way. But yeah, I mean, be a part of those communities. I think that's from a threat intel perspective. I don't know if you want to go into career intel, Ross, but we could try go down that path as well.
Yeah, I'd certainly like to touch on that, and I think your synopsis on the groups, as most people know, I've recently joined Attack IQ to lead out their EMEA build, and the my colleagues within Attack IQ are many ex-CISOs themselves, and very much connected with that intel community. A lot of ex-forces type people working with the intelligence communities and things like that, and it is a very tight knit. I thought I was quite well positioned and quite well prepared, having worked with you for so long. But I have to say, this is a whole new level of depth and connectivity, and then the open source side of it as well, with the connections with the MITRE attack framework and the Ingenuity group and what's being done there from a threat-informed defense standpoint. So no, I certainly understand that, and I'm understanding it even more coming into Attack IQ and how important those connections are in that community is. So I think, James, I think it would be helpful from a career standpoint to outline that piece as well.
Yeah, let me, before we go to that, I'll touch on another thing related to the cyber intel real quick. And I think, for those that haven't had the experience of dealing with nation state threat actors or things of that nature, cyber intel can be pretty scary. If you think about it, I mean, there's terrorism stuff that happens. There's all kind of different things that happen. And as a CISO, if you don't have that background, it can be quite daunting to know that, hey, by the way, you've got X nation state coming in and they're doing this to your systems, and oh, by the way, you've been compromised for 4 years. It can A, blow your mind, but B, be a little scary and put you in a really tough spot. And I think the key thing around that is A, Intel's there to help you. B, it's not all that scary, and I think if you get exposed to it, you actually get a little desensitized from it, because you're like, yeah, this is the same thing happening again. Yeah, of course. But the one thing I learned over my 160 different intrusion investigations is that each one of them you have to treat like you've never, like you have to make this balance of being able to be the expert, understand what's going on, and be the leader of that incident or that investigation, with the empathy of treating it like it's knowing that it's new for them for the first time. And so through that you get to really be in their shoes and experience what they experience, and try to balance that between, yep, I've done 160 of these already. This is I'll tell you exactly how this is going to play out over the next 3 months. Here's what the attacker's going to do. Here's what we're going to do. Here's what they're going to compromise. Here's the tools they're going to use, and here's what they're going to go after. But for them, it's like, you're trying to tell them as a leader not to panic, and to be calm, and to not try to kind of hit the big red button like right away, and try to do remediation. Really is to pause and look at the scope of everything, try to understand that full scope, have some patience. And one of my customers joked around in the past that it was like having a scorpion on their leg, and then me telling them that they weren't allowed to knock it off their leg before it stung them. And so it's kind of an interesting analogy for that. But that's all related to the cyber intel side. Career intel, I think as a CISO, many of us have grown up in the tech side of things, and I think that the tech side of things will carry you fairly far. To be quite honest, you can be carried fairly far in that area. You could be recognized as like a subject matter expert in your area, in your space, and be recognized by the community. But I think one aspect of things too is looking at, how do you build a successful program? Because now it's changed from you being this like rock star individual contributor, if you will, to this leader of leaders. And I think it's a transition that can be very tough. And even for me, I did a lot of personal growth and development courses and things like that, where I started understanding that it wasn't about me anymore. It's easy to say that it's not about you, and you don't want to be that guy that's like, oh yeah, I know it's about me. But when you get faced with the reality of that, it's about you and your career, your brand, the fact that you want to be this personal rock star. And then you have to transition into, how do I make everybody else rock stars? And I think that's a very tough transition for a lot of folks. And the other thing too is I mentioned some things before about the business aspects of being a CISO, and the technical stuff's only going to carry you so far. When you start getting into the boardroom and start interacting with those types of folks, it's you have to speak their language, right? If you can't speak their language, you're not going to get the money, you're not going to build the program. And you're just not going to get the backing that you need. And so, one of the more influential things that I did was I went out and got my MBA. And so I did that to really learn the financial language. And now I can do things when I walk into the boardroom and look at, what my net present value is if I go forward with this project, what my internal rate of return is. We can start talking about, risk in different ways. And so I can speak the language of the board. And I think that's served us well, at least in building our security program. Where I think some CISOs come in and they don't have that business knowledge and experience to understand that, hey, I have to tailor my program to the business. And they think, okay, I've done this before. It's a cookie cutter. I'm going to lift it. I'm going to put it in this new company, and it's going to be all good. Well, cultures are different. Business is different. Your board is different. Everything is different. And so I think that's a crucial mistake that a lot of CISOs make, is thinking that they can just replay it, or that they know, because we've grown up in the tech space, that we think we're, super smart, that they know the answers to everything. And the reality is we don't. And to be able to go seek out those answers and then get them confirmed, and then build your program around that it's just absolutely critical. So I think going from technical, get the business acumen that you need to be able to drive that conversation at that next level, because the technical side will only carry you so far.
I'm just smiling a little bit because I normally do these interviews at night, and because this is my sort of moonlighting exercise as far as the channel goes. My day's dedicated to the cybersecurity fight. But given your availability and doing this, I actually stepped out of the MITRE EU Community Conference, and almost all of the speakers have been sort of talking about the having a framework and a common language finally in the security industry where they can have that conversation with executives about adversarial groups, and that these have been well studied and well documented, and it's not just the sort of fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and the boogeyman's going to get us kind of thing. It's like, look, we're in petrochemicals. These are the actors that are most likely going to target us. These are the attack vectors that they most commonly use. These are the techniques. These are the tools, TTPs and so forth, tools, techniques, procedures that they're going to employ. And so, but you've gone even beyond that with your MBA and gone more into the sort of business language, and I know your background, and I know how you've got projects funded and big projects, and I think that has been something that's been coming out in my CSO interviews, that there is this disconnect in language and the ability to be able to simplify down what we're trying to do, and from a risk standpoint, and where the investment should be made, and do it in a way that makes sense to the C-level executives that are pretty much focused on, top line, bottom line, and how can we drive growth and shareholder value. So from a best practice standpoint, given those sort of heavy duty, and I know you've been in the most heavy duty incidents globally, and obviously we can't get into detail, but privately, we've had the odd conversation, maybe we shouldn't have, but we'll leave that aside. And so given what you can share from a best practice standpoint, what would you sort of advise somebody sitting in a CISO position, or somebody wanting to get into that position, trying to build their career? What would you advise them to prepare themselves in a way so that they don't find themselves as a deer in the headlights, as it were, when the big one happens?
Yeah, it's I think the first thing is to not panic. I think oftentimes CISOs, if they've never experienced this before, they will tend to panic. They'll start taking actions inappropriately without thinking things through. And what all that does is that they're dealing with a pretty massive incident, and they start taking actions thinking that, hey, this is what I know about security, so I'm going to apply it. You may set off a chain reaction that you don't want, meaning that, like, the attacker may say, oh, they picked up my level 0, level 1 code, but they haven't picked up my level 3, level 4 code that I've got deployed as well, peppered in your environment. And they said, but since they picked up my level 1 and level 2, I'm going to shut my level 3 and 4 down for a year, and then I'll turn it back on in a year. And it's one of those things where you think you've got the attacker out of your environment, and then you kind of do this, and then you're going, oh my God, next year, like, oh, I'm getting attacked again. And it's like, no, you're not getting attacked again. You're still dealing with the same thing you had before. You just thought you got rid of it, and you didn't. And so I think, be patient. Don't panic. Don't panic is a good rule for just anything in life. That's my number one rule for my children, is I tell them, no matter what, number one rule, don't panic. And the same thing with CISOs. And then I think, from that, you really need to understand the full scope and breadth of what you're dealing with. Bring in expertise if you need them. You can bring in my old crew. You can bring in other experts, but bring in some expertise to offset that. People that have lived this, breathed this, and done this for over the course of their career, what their company's built on. Understand the PR side of things and what the impact of that. Understand the legal side of things, and being able to look at what's both my legal requirement in a breach, whether that be contractually with our customers, or whether that be state and federal laws, or international laws and things of that nature, and then what's my kind of civic duties. Like it's there's legal side is one side of it, and that will carry it, but oftentimes there's an ethical component too, and you have to figure that part out and understand that, and then understand the PR ramifications and what it can do to your brand. And I think a lot of CISOs have a hard time, when they want to get budget and they want to show, like, hey, basically it's breach prevention. Here's the Pony Monitor report that shows you what the latest data points is. For us, it's harder. Like, go find the technology security space in the Pwnymon report. You won't find it. You'll find a tech space, you'll find a financial space, you'll find some of these other ones, but you won't find security. And so you have to really define what that really means and looks like based on all of those data points, and to be able to understand, like, this is why I need funding moving forward. And then the last thing I would say around that is, if you're dealing with a big situation, get the right resources. I will tell you that the checkbook does open up in a company to support that, because they know that the downside of it is, if they don't do it, there's going to be significant brand damage and things like that down the road. And so, I used to joke around that the absolute best way to get your security program off the ground and get funded is to have an incident. No one wants to live through it, but it's actually interesting, even though I know CISOs are scared, because they think that if there's an incident, they're the fall guy or gal, and they're the ones that are going to be, kind of singled out and said, okay, look, here's the sacrificial lamb we're going to make. But the reality is, I think a lot of companies nowadays are looking for folks that have gone through that before, and so that way they won't be a deer in the headlights when it actually happens. So just keep all those things into perspective.
So, James, we've sort of covered intelligence, we've talked about best practice. So, from an experience standpoint, we've talked about the sort of deer in the headlights, but ideally, we want to help organizations preactively or preemptively avoid becoming a headline, avoid that sort of breach scenario. So what sort of experience would you share on the sort of offensive side and the defensive side, sort of red teaming, blue teaming, purple teaming? What would you sort of share to help people think about how they would improve their sort of cyber readiness, improve their security posture to sort of harden their environment and make it hard for the sort of adversaries to actually sort of, cause a major problem for them?
Yeah, that's good. I mean, you could sum it up as I never worked a breach at a company that deployed any resemblance of best practices for security. And so, if you take care of a lot of the low-hanging fruit when it regards to security, you'll stand a higher probability of not having a breach than having a breach. And I think that's an important factor. It doesn't take every single, it doesn't take millions and millions of dollars and an army of, multiple hundreds of analysts and things like that. Just build the infrastructure, build the strategy, get the basics done. And then I think if you look at it from that perspective too, security not only should drive the business, but it also, or help drive the business and support and enable the business, but it should also drive best practices into IT and IS. And I think that's an important thing to consider. If you're not, who cares if you've got a vulnerability management program or you've got a security operations program? If you're not making your IT or your IS better as a part of that, then you're not doing it right as a CISO. And so if you look at all the latest breaches, what percentage of them are related to IT hygiene? Bad configuration, bad practices in IT, bad development. And so your program should drive those. And if you're driving remediation there, you're decreasing the overall risk to the business. And I think, that's just something that's really effective in being able to communicate that and being able to show that you are in fact reducing risk and preventing the breach, because you're implementing things like, hey, look, we look at containers and we don't have any open, containers out there that have no authentication and no authorization or access control, but have all of our customer data in it. We don't have to deal with those types of situations. We don't have to deal with such situations as, patchy struts and missing patches, or, this one-off development system that never got patched in the first place. It was kind of out there. No one knew it existed. How do I do that? So IT asset management. So like all the basics, even of IT security, should be driving as well. And I think if you do that, you'll be pretty successful with CISO and showing a reduction of risk. Because that'll also be, it's very circular. It'll be you discovering things, driving remediation in IT, and then showing it back from the perspective of, now I've got less incidents, I've got less events I'm dealing with, I've got less risk for the business, and so all of it will sort of play off of each other. But that's the job of a CISO really too, is to drive remediation in IT and reduce risk there.
James, I just want to thank you. I really did build this channel with you in mind, and going back to your point around sort of trying to sort of get over the ego, and I've done the BBC, I've done all the TV, and I really want to sort of point the camera at somebody else and become the interviewer rather than the interviewee. So you're certainly the hero of this interview, and you're certainly my hero. I've learned a lot working with you, and I'm just proud to have had the opportunity to do so much together, and I just want to personally thank you for that time, and also for doing this for the community and doing this for the channel, and I think it's been really insightful and really helpful, and I just, again, just big massive thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Ross. It's a pleasure, and obviously a pleasure working with you. I think we enjoyed some good laughs over a few drinks, some good storytelling. I appreciate your flair for fashion, though you're just in a polo today. I've seen you in three-piece suits and velvet suits and everything else. So it's been a pleasure. And then it's funny about you mentioned the ego piece. By the way, most CISOs tend to have an ego. So I think those of us that grew up in the security space, we know it's such a tight-knit community. So so whether you're the interviewer or interviewee, there's always going to be some level of ego probably in the room. But I think downplaying that and being able to get to what's best to help people is probably the most important thing. So it's been a pleasure working with you as well, Ross, and thanks again for the opportunity to interview.
I was going to end it there, but the funny piece about the suits and things, it's black polo t-shirts. That's what everyone at Attack IQ wears, and that's what I'll be wearing. So we're all just one team doing good work. So I think that's hopefully delivers on the point that you made earlier. James, once again, thank you very much, and be safe out there, and my regards to the family. Bye for now.